Before this video starts, let me just say, I had so much fun with this story that I actually ended up having a special guest hop on. And let's just say, we ended up finishing the entirety of this video. So if you guys go on to enjoy this story and you want the full 2-hour movie, then I suggest hitting the like button, because the goal for today's video is gonna be 2,000 likes. And once you guys hit that, I'll drop that full movie for y'all. That said, enjoy What If Deku Had Tatsumakis powers. Alright, before we start this video, let's just get two things straight. Number one, Inko is going to matter a lot for this video, and number two, Inko's also going to happen to be the number 2 ranked hero in My Hero. So, how does that happen, some of you guys might be wondering. Let's get into her backstory. The reason that I wanted to do something with Inko in this timeline has more to do with the fact that she already has a telekinesis quirk, so pretty much taking advantage of her quirk, passing it on to Deku, but as something stronger, I figured that that would have made for the perfect way of giving Deku Tatsumaki's abilities. So let's cover how that happens, why don't we? Alright, so for this specific timeline of events, Inko is not going to be having a very happy beginning to her life, because when she would be 16, she would fall in love with a no-good kid by the name of Hisashi Midoriya. Now, Midoriya is kind of a jerk, right? And she knew that, but she loved him because he said all the right things, he bought her all the right stuff, and he always took her out on dates. He treated her well when at home, she was pretty much made to cook, clean, and do your stereotypical girl activities at home. So with that said, her feeling love, she kind of falls for him really hard, and this eventually leads to both of them making a big oopsie by the name of Izuku Midoriya, which for her would be a blessing, but for the dad, he would be like, alright, I'm out. And yeah, he leaves her life. This essentially ends up leaving Inko to fend for herself with the young boy. And so seeking aid would, find the best things possible, eventually managing to get them both a very bad apartment, with her having to work 2 jobs and a whole lot of hours just to keep them afloat. And this would be the usual for Inko in her life for the first 1.5 years that Izuku would be born. So one day, as she would be rolling the boy in her stroller, making their way to the 99-cent store to get a couple of groceries, this is when out of nowhere a random villain attack would commence. Who the villain is, what he looks like, or what his power is, doesn't really matter. But what does matter is what triggers in Inko from this moment. Because realizing that all she could do in that moment was cower in fear, begging that the villain wouldn't harm her child, she would sit there feeling completely and utterly hopeless. Luckily, however, there would be a random group of thugs who, seeing this, would have been like, hey, leave the girl alone, as they proceed to beat on the man, rob him, and stuff him in a trash can. This would kind of just leave Inko in shock, realizing that there was no heroes around, and if those guys weren't there, who knows what would have happened to her, but even worse, Izuku. And with this interaction having left a question in Inko's mind, this would be something that she would start wondering over and over, realizing that if she wants to protect Izuku, she's gonna have to do it herself, considering that Inko doesn't exactly live in the nicest part of town. That said, every single day, Inko would start to train on her relatively weak telekinesis quirk, at first believed only able to drag small objects, until Inko, through training it every day in small, minuscule ways, would eventually learn that her quirk actually has a lot of potential, because at first it started by lifting a control towards her, and then slowly started to divulge into Inko being able to actually lift up chairs. This would stun her because her training had only consisted of about a week consistently pulling objects towards her, and she's made this big of an improvement. She would realize that the quirk that she had thought to be relatively weak and not fit for heroic work might just have a little more to it than meets the eye. And so, after training for an entire year, every single time that she would be working her shift, she would be lifting some objects in the kitchen. At home, whenever she was watching TV, Inko eventually would get to the point where she could lift all of the furniture in the home at once. So through this consistent training, eventually she would realize she had gotten very strong. But never having understood just how strong, she obviously never knew the full potential of her quirk, nor did she really want to find it out, because in her eyes, she wasn't training to be a hero, just to defend themselves. And so long as Inko could keep people at bay, that was good enough for her. This, however, wouldn't last too long, because very soon she was gonna have to face off against a real villain. And unluckily for her, it was actually gonna be the next day, because tomorrow was gonna be the National Take Your Kid to Work Day. So Inko, making her way towards the normal side of town, where unfortunately there's a lot of villain incidents, Inko, on her way to work boarding the train, would be sitting down with Izuku, playing with him, making faces and playing peekaboo with the boy, as he's, kind of just sitting there going, oh, like so cool, like those baby sounds that they make that they're like absolutely adorable. He's doing that. And all the while this would be taking place, this is when out of nowhere, 3 dudes with like these like very stereotypical looking trench coats and like hats, fedoras basically, stand up and they're like, all right, everybody listen up. You're all gonna hand over your valuables or the train goes boom. It being revealed that these guys were actually duplicates, a guy having the ability to create 3 duplicates of himself with 3 different personalities. Sort of a washed down version of Twice, basically. At hearing this, a man on the train would go, wait, if this guy does blow up the train, does that then mean he'd be blowing himself up? He's bluffing, come on. Everybody, who's with me? Let's not give him anything. In fact, I say that we all rush him right now and take him down. And so everybody would get up and be like, yeah, he's right. Some of them started to activate their rather weak quirks, with the guys all 3 in unison waving their fingers, saying that this isn't the real body. And if they choose to make things difficult for them, then he doesn't mind killing all 300 passengers. As with that being said, everybody immediately pipes down. Like literally, they all form into a big line, them all not understanding what's going on, until they all get closer and closer, realizing, damn, we're being robbed. And Inko, not really having too much on her, being like 7th in line away from having to hand over all her things, holding the young Izuku, not taking a chance to leave him alone, she, saddened with the look on her face, would hold out the only money she has, staring at it, realizing that if she gets robbed, they're gonna get kicked out. She had already asked for an extension from her landlord, so she just can. And so Inko, closing her eyes and just thinking about it, that she might just be able to stop these guys, would then think to herself that she has to do it. And so, using her telekinesis ability, she would rip away the control from the men before slamming them towards the back of the train and holding them up, kind of like forcing them to like levitate a little bit, like choke forcing them kind of. All 3 of the men are like, what? What's going on? As Inko, looking towards them, would say, you're gonna give everybody their valuables back. I won't let you villains rob anyone else. To which onlookers seeing this would start clapping, going, we're saved! We get to get all our stuff back! People recording Inko, and the incident going absolutely viral. Inko's face would be all over the news, and when she would report to work a few hours later, her boss would call her into the office. Inko, he would say, as she would sit down and go, what'd I do? He would then say, you're a hero! I never knew I had such an incredible employee working for me, but I guess it makes sense. I do hire the best after all. He would look towards her, telling her that she is actually gonna get a little bit of a raise. And Inko, smiling at this, would say, what, really? Thinking that, oh dude, this is the best. Like, I guess good things do come to those who do good things. So as Inko and, Izuku would make their way home later, this is when suddenly Inko would have a knock at the door late night, and as she would go to check, she would find that it's actually a police officer. So Inko, recognizing this and opening the door, would say, yes, hello? As the police officer looking towards her would say, your name is Inko Midoriya, am I right, ma'am? To which Inko would nod, and the man would say, well, to keep it brief with you, ma'am, after the incident that went viral with you in it, the police would actually like to take some information from you and get a better account of what had actually taken place. Inko would nod, asking if he would like to come in, and he would say, well, actually, ma'am, we need you at the station. But she would say that she can't possibly do that she's taking care of her son Izuku, and when he wakes up at night, who will be there to tend to him? So Tsukachi would be like, I guess we could do it this way. Sitting down, and she's like, could I offer you a cup of coffee? And then, Tsukachi, sits down, he starts noting down the incident, asking questions such as, when did this happen? How many villains were there? What made you act? What is your quirk? Stuff like that. And Inko would start answering all the questions, being extremely nervous, asking if she's in trouble. Detective Tsukachi just looking at her and saying not at all, that because she was acting under article of the police force, that she's actually okay, noting that her actions were in incredible, and that because she caused 0 damage, she's actually gonna be awarded a check for saving so many people's life. It's a bit of a gift from the police force to her. She saved the city a lot of money, and it doesn't really cost them too much to help her out. So Inko receiving this, she would get like a grand total of $3,000. Officer Tsukachi noting that her quirk is incredible and asking if she's ever considered performing real hero work, to which Inko kind of timidly would say that she hasn't, explaining that most of her life she had a relatively weak quirk, so she never thought she could do it, and it was only when she started training it at home, obviously not in an illegal way she would add, she figured out that it was a lot stronger than she thought. Tsukachi will tell her that be it as it may, he does have connections, and if she ever thought about being a hero and reliving that experience, then she can give him a call and he'll try to set her up with a provisional license. And so Inko hearing that would be like, wait, do you mean it? Do you really believe I have it in me to be a hero? Tsukachi would nod, saying that he more than believes that she has it in her. So Inko, smiling at Tsukachi, would nod, saying that she'll think it over. As the following days, as Inko would be at work, she would suddenly think that maybe being a hero would be better. It would help Izuku live a better life. And who knows, maybe it'll have Izuku look up to her even more. So Inko, realizing that she can get to live the fantasy of being a hero, would pretty much go to her boss, giving her 2-week notice, to both of her bosses actually, before then giving Tsukachi a call. She would live on the last paycheck from both jobs, and once that would be all over with, she would go on to attend the provisional licensing exam, which, considering just how many heroes there are, and how many actually garbage heroes there is, I have absolutely 0 doubt that Inko would pass. So, shortly after receiving her license, she would request work at a pro hero agency as a sidekick. Now, what sidekick is she gonna be, and to who? Honestly, I don't know, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter the story, because once she gets the hang of what it's like to actually be a full-time hero, she ends up opening her own agency within the year, and within another year, she goes on to become the #2 hero of Japan, not only because her quirk is incredible and she's actually capable of stopping a lot of incidents, growing her strength and her telekinesis abilities, able to stop entire trains and cars. She would blow through the ranks thanks to her humble personality and even her looks. Because remember, in this timeline, Inko never actually ends up letting herself go, and seeing as Inko sort of looks like All Might's mom, I'm gonna just say that he kind of looks like her in a hero costume. It would be green, kind of similar to the actual Tatsumaki outfit, just because I think it's a cool little homage to the actual character we're basing this off of. And yeah, she is the #2 hero. So by the time that Izuku would turn 4 years old, now we're actually going to focus on the main character, Izuku would be going to school, attending the same place with Katsuki Bakugo, and as everybody else would start unlocking their quirk, Izuku would get worried, thinking that he might have just not gotten anything. However, as Izuku would be eating dinner with his mother, questioning her on how cool it was stopping that incident last night, Inko having literally stopped a three train collision that was about to kill thousands of people with perfect efficiency. Literally nobody felt the trains come to a halt. Izuku would then be told everything about it, him being like, "You're the best, mom," you know, idolizing her and All Might, her actually giving Izuku like a cool little sign thing of All Might, saying it's, you know, she knows the guy, would be like the coolest thing ever. And while he'd be eating, eating with a spoon, this is when out of nowhere Izuku would drop it and catch it mid-air before it falls. Realizing that he has his mother's quirk, he would go, Mom, I unlocked my quirk. I have telekinesis too." So Inko, seeing this and seeing the very, very, very weak control that she has, barely not letting it hit the ground, she would smile, remembering the moment that she actually awakened her quirk. However, it wasn't even half as strong as that. The moment it happened for her, she made the spoon slightly shake, so most of her life she thought she was quirkless. It eventually got stronger over the years, and when she started training it, forget about it. But anyways, that said, she would take Izuku to the quirk doctor, where his quirk would be registered as telekinesis. Izuku returning to school the next day, where after everybody would ask him what his quirk was, he would proudly say he has his mom's quirk, telekinesis. And as everybody would be crowding around Deku, being like, "Whoa, you're the coolest, you have an even better quirk than Bakugo," Bakugo would suddenly say, "Better? What are you guys talking about? Show us your quirk, Deku. I'd love to test that theory." So Izuku, showing that he has the capability of like lifting a spoon slightly, Bakugo would say, "That's it? My explosions here are gonna blow your quirk out of the water. Just wait and see, Deku. I'm gonna be #1, and you'll be lucky to be even top 10 with a weak quirk like that." People would look at Deku being like, "But he's the son of Inko." And Bakugo goes, "Son or not, I'm gonna crush him. I swear it." And so Izuku and Bakugo from then on would kind of have a rocky relationship, Bakugo refusing to hang out with Deku, and actually choosing to continue to bully him much like he would in the original. Because remember, Izuku's young, so Inko never had him start training her quirk. She believed that once he became older, he would start that. But due to Bakugo's insistent bullying and telling him that he'd be better off quirkless with such a garbage quirk like that, eventually leading to everybody else jumping on the train, and Deku eventually starting to come home with a couple of bruises on him, courtesy of Bakugo, Inko decides that maybe it wouldn't be too bad if she could teach Izuku a thing or two. So, from that day forth, at the age of 7 years old, Deku would now start training every day with his mother, her teaching him the exact same techniques that she had used to take her relatively weak quirk to a very formidable one, and Izuku pushing as hard as he possibly can, not only to prove everybody else wrong, but mainly Bakugo. Izuku would get stronger and stronger by the day, developing a kind of chip on his shoulder type personality, not wanting to upset his mom, because if his mom is the number 2 hero and he's letting himself get bullied around by Bakugo, what does that say about his mom? You know, he kind of hates the fact that he feels like a disappointment to his own mother. Like, he doesn't compare to her, and he really takes that to heart because everybody recognizes him as Inko's son, the son of the number 2 hero. And so, with Izuku's constant training, he eventually gets extremely powerful with his telekinesis quirk at the age of 9 years old, obviously reaping less benefits than Inko because his quirk was less developed due to his age. So he would have a fairly strong telekinetic ability, capable of pushing people back and, you know, sending them flying. Nothing too crazy. That said, this is when we jump cut to a day where Izuku would be in line waiting for his lunch, and as he would get his stuff ready and make his way towards the table, this is when Bakugo would stick his leg out, causing Izuku to fall to the ground, his face being filled with the spaghetti and meatball special that honestly tasted like pure garbage. As he would look up at Bakugo, meatballs literally stuck in his eyes, falling, with Bakugo being like, "You see that freaking loser? Can't believe he's the son of the number 2 hero." And Izuku hearing that and having enough of Bakugo's stuff, even though Inko had always taught him not to retaliate with violence with more violence, Izuku would suddenly smirk, thinking that maybe he doesn't have to retaliate with violence, lifting up every single tray of food in the entire area, literally creating a telekinetic, like, cloudy with the chance of meatballs tornado, sending it flying at the direction of Bakugo, which in turn spreads onto the rest of the people behind him, a grand total of 11 people total. Izuku with this would start dying of laughter, looking at Bakugo and cracking a multitude of jokes at him, with Bakugo practically seething, just going, "So Deku, looks like you finally decided to grow up here, huh? Guess it's a shame today's the day you die!" Blasting an explosion at Deku's stomach, which sends him flying across the cafeteria, hitting his head on one of the nearby benches, pissing the boy off massively, as Izuku just swipes his hand into the air, pushing all of his telekinetic abilities, sending Bakugo crashing into like 3 cafeteria tables, inevitably breaking Bakugo's arm, as Deku, walking over towards him, asks him to bully him now, before walking away, and everybody who was watching just being dead silent at the now fully defeated Bakugo. This ultimately culminates in the 2 students being taken to the office, and once there, this is when the principal would end up calling Inko, who was literally in the middle of her hero duty and had to be called to the school. So pulling up in her full-on hero outfit, she's like, "What happened? Is Izuku okay?" As walking in, she sees Izuku kind of just looking down, pissed off and sad at the same time that his mom is gonna get the wrong idea, and this is when the teacher would go on to inform her that her son caused a fight, covered a bunch of people with cafeteria food, and to make things worse, he even ended up breaking Katsuki's arm. Mitsuki at this point would say, "What the hell, Inko? Just what have you been teaching your son?" Inko kind of just bowing down in sadness, as after the story would all be taken from the people who were watching, which are pretty much Bakugo's goonies, they all, thanks to the fact that they were covered in food and they're scared of Bakugo, would have lied, being false witnesses and leading Izuku's story not to be believed at all. So by the time that Izuku would be in the car with Inko, and he would tell her, "Mom, it wasn't like that, I swear. Bakugo tripped me, and then he poured food on me. What was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to just let him get away? I didn't fight him at first, I just sent a bunch of food at him to get him dirty." And Inko hearing that would say, "Izuku, I told you not to answer violence with more violence. That doesn't help anyone. You could have ignored it. You're better than that." Izuku finally having enough of this, as he would yell back, "Why? All my life I've been ignoring him. He's made me a living punching bag, and the entirety of the school doesn't praise me for being your son. They make fun of me. What did you expect me to do? Just continue letting him treat me like garbage? Until when? Until he finally grew a consciousness and maybe decided to treat me with some decency? To which Inko, just completely silent, would look at her son, seeing the look in his eyes, just angry. At this, Izuku would say, "To hell with that. I'm never gonna let anyone disrespect me again. I promise that. I'm done being a pushover," Izuku would bark before looking out the window. Inko kind of just saddened knowing that might have been the worst thing to say to her son. But not really wanting to, ignite the fire even more, she just drops him off, saying that she'll be home in a few, returning back to her hero duties, stopping about 2 incidents, and then returning home, finding Izuku fast asleep, when in reality he was just turned towards the wall, not saying anything because he didn't really feel like speaking to his mom. That said, after this would take place, the next week Izuku would be transferred to a different school, and at said new school, this is when Izuku would finally live up to that promise he had made, reinventing himself and never allowing anyone to look down at him or make fun of him. This eventually leads to Izuku being a character that people don't make fun of and don't treat as a joke. Izuku would love it because now he would have friends, and he developed an attitude very, very similar to that of Tatsumaki. So he kind of develops a bit of a prideful personality, being a bit of a jerk to anybody who doesn't look at him in the same light he views himself, and also definitely would have grown in strength. So with Izuku's time finishing up in middle school and there being no sludge incident due to the fact that, remember, Izuku not going to the same school with Bakugo means there's no way he would take the same path. So no Sludgeville incident means no one for all Deku. But that doesn't quite mean that we don't get the 10 months of training, because Deku would definitely spend his time doing a whole lot of training, having found a beach covered in a bunch of trash, with Izuku using his telekinetic abilities every day after school to pick up as much of it as he possibly could. At the point that he would start his training, Izuku would have the capability of picking up, say, 2 tons worth of stuff, with by the end of his training, him now being able to lift up a grand total of 10,000 tons, give or take. I wasn't really too sure what the metric of a train being lifted, but I kind of want Deku to have the level of strength that Inko had about 3 years into her pro career, meaning that Deku is gonna be an absolute menace when bro takes the entrance exam, which is actually what I'm just about to cover, so let's get to it. Anyways, Izuku in this timeline, thanks to being the son of Inko Midoriya, means that in this timeline he won't actually be taking the same tests as in the original, because now he was gonna be taking the same test that Todoroki and Momo took, alongside with that wind guy, which, speaking of wind quirk, I just recently dropped the video where Deku had a wind quirk. It's a banger, go check it out. Anyways, shameless plug aside, Izuku making his way inside of this testing area for the recommendation students, he would find that their test was a lot different than the other people's, and so, using his telekinetic ability to fly, floating himself into the air, Izuku would proceed to blitz past Todoroki, tying with Inasa in terms of speed, shocking everybody by the performance of the number 2 hero's son, with Todoroki definitely taking note of the fact that that was Inko Midoriya's son, better known as Terrible Tornado. And so we would probably watch on as Izuku takes the test, not thinking about anything, all the while Todoroki in his mind would be having a competition with Izuku, trying to see who has a better control of their quirks. Todoroki realizing that Deku is honestly on a whole nother level, at least when it came to the exams that they actually had to take part in, which were mainly about obstacles, which Todoroki thought he would be the best at, but even Inasa was surpassing him in these tests. It was kind of strange for Todoroki. A weird feeling. But anyways, that said, Izuku would of course get into UA, this being a day to celebrate. Inko giving her son Izuku a really cool motorcycle that he could actually use to get to UA every day. Izuku would be a bit caught off guard by this. He's like, couldn't I just fly to school? And she's like, you still don't have your provisional hero license, so you're not going to be doing that, mister. How about you ride this instead? Giving Izuku a lime green motorcycle with a really sick helmet. So Izuku taking it alongside the jacket she had gotten for him, he would thank Inko, saying that he can't wait to show her just how strong he'll be going into UA. Inko saying that he's so lucky. Inko stating just how proud she is of her son and how far he's came, saying that never in her wildest dreams did she think she was going to be able to afford to give Deku these opportunities or even these gifts, and she's so happy. She bursts into tears as Deku looks at her and goes, "Mom, don't do that," getting a bit teary-eyed as the two have, a little embrace moment, and Inko's like, "I'm so sorry, you've just gotten so big," tucking at bro's like cheeks as he's just like, "Mom," and then finally they go out to dinner. But anyways, that being said, this is when Izuku the very next day, the moment he wakes up, he would grab a piece of toast, head out the door, and make his way straight to the school. Arriving there and parking his bike, this is when, like, flowing his hair into the wind because he looks exactly like the Deku in the thumbnail, everybody would watch on as Izuku makes his way inside, and then walking over towards an upperclassman with blue hair in Nejire would ask, "Hey, you mind helping me find class 1A? She's like, "Oh, you're a first year, you look kind of cute," of course. As she takes him to class 1A and he's like, "Was she flirting with me or is she just that nice?" Izuku would, put that in the back of his mind as entering the door, he would breathe in thinking that he's so excited to, before then seeing Bakugo. This would just ruin everything. It's like someone just took a dump in his breakfast, you know what I mean? And so staring at Bakugo, he's like, hopefully he doesn't notice me. But unfortunately for him, Bakugo immediately notices him, going, "So Deku, looks like your quirk actually allowed you to get into UA after all. Can't say I'm surprised though, seeing as mommy's quirk definitely helped you out in that department." Everybody hearing that would say mommy's, looking at his hair, then realizing, OMJ. "That's terrible, Tornado son," they would all say. The girls in the class being like, "Oh dude, can we please get an autograph from your mom?" And the boys in class being like, "Dude, what's it like having such a hot mom?" All the while Aizawa would get up going, "Everybody shut up." Everybody immediately stays quiet, to which Izuku, looking at Aizawa, would then hear him tell him to sit down, before then explaining what they're here, that he's the homeroom teacher, and to put these on and get dressed. After he would go on to do that, everybody would meet Aizawa outside, where Aizawa would go on to tell them that all their lives, they have all been treated as though they're equals, but the truth is, they're not. Some people are just naturally better than others. And so today they're going to participate in a test that's going to let them know whether or not they deserve to be in UA. Uraraka, hearing this, would say, but aren't we already in UA? He's like, "Not for long if you don't pass this test and blow my expectations out of the water." Looking towards Uraraka and then the rest of the class, everybody would gulp, be like, As after this, he then tosses the ball towards the boy who had gotten highest score in the robot portion, being Katsuki Bakugo. And as he would catch the ball, he would ask what he's gonna do, the teacher explaining that he needs to toss it as hard as he can from that circle. How he does it, he doesn't care, only telling him one more thing before he throws it, telling him to go plus ultra. So Bakugo, gripping it tightly, looking back towards Deku and thinking that it's about time he showed off just how strong he's gotten since that day he was humiliated, he would reel his arm back and throw it as hard as possible, getting 100 more meters than he would have in the original due to that humbling experience that would have forced Bakugo to train a bit harder. That said, as everybody would watch on, they would get excited, going, "Whoa, we get to use our quirks? This is awesome," Kaminari would say, until Aizawa would cut him off, going, "Awesome? We have 3 years to mold you into perfect heroes, and your job is to save people's lives. There's nothing awesome about it. We're on time crunch constant, and if you don't take this training seriously, you won't make it in the big leagues." Before then smiling and giving the class the ultimate ultimatum. Whoever ends up last gets expelled. At hearing this, everybody brings their A game. And so, we would then watch on as they would do the 50-meter dash, Izuku getting an incredible score thanks to his quirk allowing him to move at incredible speeds, followed by the grip strength test, Izuku crushing the machine with his quirk, kind of bypassing the rules, then the standing long jump, which Izuku's able to simply fly over, and as for the repeated side steps using his telekinesis, he kind of throws himself side to side to side to side to side to side, until eventually low-key, he gets motion sickness and has to stop. After this would happen, Izuku would then be chuckled at by Bakugo, and then would come the final test, in which Bakugo, looking at Izuku, would mutter under his breath, "Good luck, number 2. To which Izuku would bark back, "I don't need luck, Katsuki. I got mommy's quirk, remember?" He would make his way into the circle and then double Bakugo's throw. Bakugo getting pissed off, Izuku actually being higher than Bakugo during the exams. After everything would be said and done, Class would end, and as everybody would begin packing, making their way home, this is when Bakugo appearing behind Izuku would tell him not to get a big head, that those tests don't say anything, that in real hand-to-hand combat, that's when they'll find out who the stronger of the two is, adding that he better prepare, because he plans on embarrassing Deku thoroughly. But Izuku, looking at Bakugo, would simply walk right past him, saying, "Yeah, we'll see about that, Katsuki," before walking by and muttering, "You stuck-up prick." Bakugo hearing that and saying, "What was that, Deku?" To which Deku, glowing green, looking at Bakugo about to use his quirk on him, would then be stopped by Aizawa, who at canceling it would say no fighting in this school, explaining that if the two want to hash it out, then they better do it during their training, going on to tell them that this is their first and last warning, and that the next time something like this happens, he'll be sure to expel both of them. Izuku with this would calm down, getting on his bike and riding off. Bakugo simply staring at Izuku, pissed off at just the kind of person that he'd become. Truth be told, he had half expected Izuku to remain just how he was when he had bullied him, but now it seems like he's actually grown a spine, and Bakugo hated it, since after all, he did miss his punching bag. But in Bakugo's head it didn't matter, because he would be getting it back real soon. The first chance he gets, he swore he would destroy Deku. And it actually wouldn't take long for him to try that, because very soon, they would be holding the hero versus villain exercise. And with All Might entering the room like a normal person, the countdown had already begun. And with the students revealing their pro-hero costumes, Izuku coming out in a black version of his mother's hero costume, he would be ready for this. Excited to test his hand against whoever his opponent is, hoping realistically that it would be Kacchan. And with him getting paired up with Uraraka, he'd be kind of happy, seeing as in his eyes, the girl was kind of cute. So going over to her to introduce himself, her saying that she knows all about him, that she's a huge fan of the tornado hero. Izuku smiling as she asks him a couple of questions about her mom, when suddenly Bakugo would give him a stare down, holding a block that says that they're gonna be going up against each other. Izuku and Bakugo would both give each other a look of "I'm gonna kill you." Izuku just smiling as he would think to himself that he's getting real freaking lucky today. And so, him pretty much letting Uraraka in on that rivalry they have, her questioning why they look so serious, Uraraka would understand. "Oh, so it's a battle against fated rivals. Alright, I'll try not to get in the way." And Izuku would smile at her, saying thanks, as they enter the room, and now everything would begin. Bakugo in this moment would tell Ida to protect the bombs. Ida saying, "What? You're not gonna stay here?" Bakugo just going, "Shut up, Four Eyes, I've got business to handle. Just make sure that bomb doesn't get caught by that girl teammate of his." And so, with Izuku and Uraraka making their way up to the second and third floor, Izuku just kind of walking through it, recognizing that he'll probably have an easier time fighting Bakugo on the inside of the building. This is when out of nowhere, hearing the sounds of an explosion getting closer, Izuku would say, "Come on, Bakugo."
"Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!"
That wasn't the line, Kacchan!
Whatever!